So Mona, I think the question that I want to kick off with is obviously given your experience with Airbnb, and even your previous startups, and now with you starting something as interesting as Upraised. My first question for you is, what in your opinion are the first principles of building a marketplace, and what about the business construct of building a marketplace makes it that complicated and makes it that tough to do?
Yeah, so I think you know, in order for anyone to kind of think about building a marketplace, it's super important to understand at a first principles level the key components and the interplay of like supply and demand and how they kind of rub, you know, how you build one off of each other. Uh, I think that is not. It may seem like, oh, like of course people understand what supply is and people understand what demand is, but in the construct of a marketplace, it gets very complicated because in most cases it becomes a chicken and egg problem, right? You don't have supply, you can't get demand, but you can't have demand because you don't have supply. So how do you break out of it? So having a deeper understanding of like what are the first principles on firstly who's your supply and who's your demand, and then ultimately which one of them have a larger pain point, uh, and hence have a larger and could have longer stickiness to your platform. And so but these also typically the harder part of the equation to solve for, because but then if you do solve for it, the easier part can come later. There are lots of marketplace products that start with the easier part and they scale up really fast, but then the harder part is not so is not so easy to get to, and so that's where they fall apart, right? So I think even at Appraised, for example, every time I talk to talk to people explaining what Appraised does, we're sort of a marketplace where we're helping people break into product management and land product management careers. But if you just said that, and if you ask somebody which one would you consider a supply versus which one would you consider a demand, I bet you will have some people say that companies are the demand side and candidates are the supply side, and you'll have equal number of people say that candidates are actually the demand side and companies are the supply side. So just even knowing which is what, and uh, which one is harder to crack, is I think first principles understanding of sort of building marketplaces. And I think there are some pros and cons of building marketplaces. The biggest con and why they're so hard to build is, like I said, it's a chicken and egg problem. In our situation, for example, how do we get the best candidates to come to our platform, right? We can't do that unless the best companies come to hire from us. But why would the best companies come and hire from us if we don't already have the best candidates? So how do you break out of that, right? We've been able to break out of it just because we got lucky with the kind of investors we have. They have access to companies are willing to try us out. We kind of did a little bit of innovation on the business side, on the business model, where it's almost kind of stupid for a business to not work with us because we are fully performance based. We're not unlike another recruiter who charges you per lead, whether that lead converts or doesn't convert. We charge you only when you actually hire a candidate. So there's not much for the company to lose, because we realized that we actually had to get good companies on board to get the good talent pool attracted to us, right? So a combination of business model innovation, understanding of where the core pain point is, and how do you kind of address it, not just for the short term, but also for the long term. There are other marketplaces like Airbnb, for example. They realize that, it's harder to convince any individual to open up their homes for a stranger to live. But if you went after an audience that was empty nesters, they just wanted social interaction. They wanted to welcome people from all over the world. Also, they thought of hosting, because they just have a lot of empty space that they typically use for their, reserved for their kids who no longer live with them. They also wanted to look for another source of income, because for them, it's not, most of them are retired. They don't really have a steady source of income. And so a combination of all these things, we realized that it was actually easier to go after the host segment, which is 50 plus. Although our demand side, which is the travelers, was all between 24 to 30, right? So intuitively, nobody would have thought that going after 50 pluses or their design aesthetic or their home styles would appeal to people between 24 and 30, right? Um, but somehow we were able to balance that out, and that's how we broke out of this chicken and egg problem, because we understood the pain point of the host much better than most other platforms did at the time, right? So that deep understanding, I think, is fundamental to building marketplaces, is fundamental to breaking out of this chicken and egg problem, which is like 101 to like at least starting to have a marketplace. Otherwise it ends up becoming one-sided sort of, service platform.
So, with marketplaces, like you correctly said, there's always this conundrum, especially as a founder, right? In terms of like, where do you invest first? So, like you said, step number one is figuring out what is the part. Is it your demand or supply that actually needs that investment and needs that product building? Could you give examples of how you've sort of like figured it out in terms of what pie to pick up and what to double down on, and also if you could give an example of how you've doubled down on that pie, right? Whether it's Upraised or Airbnb or any other company.
Yeah. So look at Airbnb. We we realized very quickly that there are many people that are looking to travel. Like, travel as a concept is not new, right? What is new is people opening up their homes for strangers, which meant that even if we can't organically get people, we can always fall back on performance marketing, or we can fall back on other mechanisms like tie-in with partnerships, or influencer marketing or whatever, to drive demand. But even if we spent all that effort and we got demand, they would not actually transact on our platform unless there would be supply, which is how we realized that supply was actually the harder part to solve for, and a prerequisite for us to start making money, right? Which is why we started focusing on supply. The second thing that I think we did really well in terms of marketplaces and where to focus was understanding the behavior of the demand side, and hence knowing where to build supply. Because even in supply, because supply is a harder problem to solve, you have to focus your effort because you have limited resources, right? You can't just go and build supply everywhere. Like, what
Yep.
supply is valuable to build is driven by the demand, and understanding and being able to experiment and ideate on the demand side is actually equally important. What ends up happening is people understand supply, and then they just go all into building supply before testing it out for demand, right? That's where a lot of the challenges exist, because the other thing with the supply is, once you have oversupply and they don't get the demand, they churn out. And
Correct.
so you just keep on build in this building supply cycle, because by the time you build it and you feel like, okay, now like I can do something to drive demand, it's already churned. So this understanding that this clarity that we are going to just put all our product design, all resources that are priced resources at the company on the supply side, and on the demand side we're just going to spend money to take people there, made the whole process a lot smoother, because money was something we could control, right? It was like a tap on and a tap off. Like, tomorrow morning supply is on, actually we need to drive demand to like 100 hosts that we have acquired in San Francisco over this past weekend. All right, turn on the tap, let's do it. Then we would do it for 1 month, and then we would say, okay, you know what, this has started to take off. It is, every property has gotten 1 or 2 reviews. Now let's try to run it organically, because at least they should be happy that in the first month they've gotten some money from Airbnb, right? So we kind of over time figured this out. But I would say the most important realization and the understanding that I kind of derived from my experience at Airbnb was having clarity on how you're going to prioritize your resources, and at the same time understanding that irrespective of whichever is hard or easy, you still have to balance it, because churning is a real problem in marketplaces.
Absolutely.
And you should have deep enough pockets, and you should be willing to like try non-traditional mechanisms, like advertising on Craigslist. Like, we tried many demand techniques that probably now people call it as growth hacks, but at the time it was just a genuine way of driving demand. Like, we never thought like we're going to drive 100,000 people from Craigslist to like post on our website. It was just that that's where they lived, so we went there, and it kind of started to work. So and even same for Appraised. Like, we know that for us, getting high quality candidates is the core, because if we get high quality candidates and if we're able to train them, companies are going to come. There is already dearth in the market. Like, there's no denying that. So what can we do to train these candidates is all that we're dedicating our resources in. And on the company side, we're not trying to like act sneaky or act smart or like milk money on that side yet, because if we are able to prove value, then it makes sense for the company to pay us. But if we try to over innovate too soon, then we're just dedicating resources and just convincing the company on why they should work with us, right? It doesn't make sense. So all the innovation, all the product, everything design, everything is just focused on making this candidate really skilled, so that they're like super hireable in the market, right? So yeah, I think it's kind of just important to understand what is the key driving force of why people would select you versus anything else, and how can you kind of protect that for the longest period, while kind of balancing the supply and the demand side. I guess that's probably the gist of it.
So, related to that, and I think this observation, right, of your like finding 50-year-olds with homes. Again, it's such a specific way to even aggregate. And like you correctly said, a mistake a lot of marketplaces make is they just take every single possible person and throw it on their, platform, and expect to generate demand, right? Could you talk a little bit about what are the points of inflection that someone running a marketplace should monitor, to make sure that you don't run into the churn problem where your like reputation takes a hit, or because you've got these merchants, or in your case hosts just churning out all the time. So what are the points of inflection, and also what are the metrics that one should be analyzing while building out a marketplace, apart from just number of merchants onboarded, or the GMV that you're creating?
Yeah, so I think very few companies actually have qualitative metrics on marketplaces. They try to, most of it is quantitative, which is like how many merchants do we have and how many users do we have coming in, what's your DAO and MAU, and how many people search for it and how many people get better recommendations and so on and so forth. I think one of the most fundamental things about marketplaces, just by the definition, they are aggregators. It's not like they're creating a value of their own. Like Airbnb doesn't own homes. We don't own companies. We don't create jobs, right? Like the point is we're connecting the right people to the right jobs. Similarly, Airbnb is connecting the right traveler to the right host. That's it, right? And so why do people come to Airbnb versus, for example, if I am a traveler and Suchita is a host, I stayed with Suchita once. Now, why do I need to go through Airbnb? Like I can just directly contact Suchita every single time I go to Delhi, right?
Correct.
But that doesn't happen. Why? Because we built very strong value propositions inside the product, which is around trust, which is around verification, which is around things that keep a marketplace strong and keeps the quality of the marketplace really high. These are the metrics, which I was saying, like qualitative metrics are very rarely looked at. For example, the North Star metric for us is 100% placement rate. So we want every single candidate that joins our platform to get a job. And if we can't get them a job, we actually refund the entire amount, even though we've spent 16 weeks upskilling them, right? What that does is it forces us to be highly accountable to, firstly, not enroll anybody that we don't have confidence we can get them placed. Secondly, for everything we teach them, to be focused on actually getting them a job, not just giving them like a checklist of topics and saying, okay, done, now you're done. Now you're upskilled to be a product manager. It doesn't mean anything to be upskilled to be a product manager if you can't actually convert and get a product manager job, right? And so, and because we have that level of confidence in our learning, we have held ourselves to that accountable standard. We can actually, with confidence, go to the company and say, hey, look, actually talk to him. You'll realize that he is truly upskilled from where he was, right? And so you can see the difference between somebody who comes upskilled and somebody who doesn't come upskilled, right? And so I think early on and throughout the journey of Airbnb, we've always looked at qualitative metrics. People very rarely look at it, actually. Most marketplaces think of themselves as aggregators, curators, and recommenders. So they just want to somehow be able to magically recommend you something that you would not have otherwise found on the platform easily. So they want to make it accessible, but accessible with ease and sort of make it faster. But it's actually the quality that differentiates between great marketplaces and not so great marketplaces, right? And I think that from a metric standpoint, having an understanding of whatever that quality means for you is one. Second is trust. I don't think anybody talks about trust. Very, very few companies actually measure trust. So at Airbnb, for example, there is a concept of superhost.
Correct.
And you can't become a super host if you've not had X number of bookings, and you've not had X number of bookings with X number of stars. So you have to have a 5-star rating consistently for like 30 bookings in a row, right? Which means that you've consistently, in a trusted manner, being able to deliver the same experience, which means you get the super host. And with that, you get a lot of benefits also, right? You're the first in any feature that gets loaded. If you have any troubles, you have a customer care like fast line, your insurance limits are much higher. Like there's a bunch of benefits to it. But if you didn't measure the quality, you would have never come up with the concept of superhost, right? So I think measuring the quality of the quality of the experience on your platform, whether that means whether that means for in our case, like, can we get every single candidate place, which means that every single candidate is hire worthy, like can we claim that, or it platform like Uber, for example, like can I consistently say that the driver on Uber is going to be better than any other driver, right?
Right.
Can I say that? So qualitative metrics are one which are often underlooked. Uh, Trust is the other one, and then the third is marketplaces often deteriorate an experience when they don't have retention, and the worst marketplaces are where you constantly have to spend money to both acquire supply and acquire demand, right? Which is what is happening in Uber situation, because there is zero loyalty between Uber and Ola, and every single time they have to do something, they have to throw a discount at you, right? And then
Yeah.
buy it. So they're essentially rebuying the customer with every single transaction. And why is that? Because there is no differentiator in quality of experience anymore. The waiting times are just as worse than Ola or Uber. Like there's just like a systemic problem, right? Versus Airbnb versus, let's say, I don't know, like Booking.com. It's a very clear difference what you get and what you don't get. So in that aspect, again, focus is super important.
So just if we, and if we could, sort of like backtrack a little bit, because you've given such interesting examples across the board, right? Whether it's what Airbnb did, whether it's refugees or, any of the sort of like natural disasters, you guys are usually the first ones to,
Yeah.
push out a press release saying, hey, book an Airbnb,
Yeah.
we'll host you for free. I think a slightly unrelated question to that, but when you have lean teams, right, and specifically with someone like you, who was the first female engineer, one of the first couple of employees at Airbnb, how do you decide, who to allocate where when it comes to demand versus supply, specifically when it comes to things like product building, because the tools that this merchant needs, right? And also your tools for unlockers when it comes to demand and when it comes to supply are usually not the same. So for example, on the supply side, you may want to accelerate the time it takes to onboard a merchant, or you may want to accelerate referrals in between merchants or whatever, right? On the demand side, though, the way that whole mechanism works is again fairly different. So when you're a lean tight team, you don't have the budgets and the wherewithal to experiment, to give out stays for free. How do you prioritize product and align teams? Because you're like 12 people at Upraised right now. So how are you guys managing this?
Yeah, look, I don't know if I actually have an answer for you. I don't think this is science as much as people like to believe. It's definitely part science, part art. So there are three actually key ingredients of every single person that was hired at Airbnb, and every single person that's part of Appraised, is they have generalist skills, high sense of curiosity, and high execution capacity, right? That's it. Like if you have a combination of these three, it doesn't matter whatever project, you can kind of take it from start to finish. And honestly, like you're at a scale where start to finish is actually not like a year's project. Start to finish is like 1 month project, or at max like 2 months. This whole internship thing that we're talking about, like we have 8,500 people registered to like take a test to finally get internship at like 25 high growth companies. Ideation to actually people taking the test is 3.5 weeks. So like I if you had this podcast a month ago, I would not even have told you anything about the internship, because that was not even an idea, right? So as long as you kind of have generalist skills, actually it is important for people to have generalist skills early on, because you don't know what's going to stick.
Correct.
You're going to have to throw darts in many different directions, say what's see what sticks, and then ultimately you end up hiring for like specialist skills. And again, depending on how fast you grow, the number of people, the number of generalists you need goes up, right? So if you go really fast, then you have to hire lots of generalists because like you're just exploding everywhere. If you grow slightly slowly, then you have the time to actually hire the specialist. So yeah, I think that in terms of resource allocation, it becomes slightly easier if you have generalists because they're not limited by their own imagination of what they can do. Also, like I said, this attitude of execution and like shipping and getting shit done, as long as you kind of have that, I feel like the high that people get about working at startups is the fact that they get to work in like 1,000 different things, right? Like you get to wear multiple hats and you're not like boxed in a certain role. And I'm yet to see anybody complain that, oh my God, I got hired. Like I thought I was going to do this one thing at Upraised and now I'm doing this completely different thing. It actually is like, for them, it's like, oh my God, this is the reason I'm here,
Yeah.
And so I think it kind of works because you tend to attract that kind of people early on at a very small company like ours. But if you can just kind of balance out the generalist skill set, I feel like resource allocation is not such a huge problem. But focus is. Knowing where to focus is, I think, one of the hardest things to like get right. And I think that a lot has been written about like lean startup technique and like going agile and doing this, or like some people say like do research before you start. Some people like to just talk to like 5 users and feel like, okay, this is enough, I can go build a product. So I think I don't think there is one path or one right answer. There's many ways you can go about it, and I think that's honestly where I feel like second time founders or serial entrepreneurs have a huge leverage because
100%. Yeah.
they kind of can anticipate where you're going to fall short. And without having to spin those wheels, figuring that out early on actually saves you so much time and effort. So I think there is some wisdom in why like serial entrepreneurs are able to raise money faster and bigger chunks because people are more confident that they won't make the same mistakes. So I think, yeah, I don't know, I don't think I answered your question, but I'm like I don't think that there is a way to say like this is like step 1 2 3 4. If you follow, you'll land with the right prioritization method of like figuring out where Mona should work and where Suchita should work. It's actually honestly like it's far more like nuanced than that. So I'm not sure I can like.
But what I want to double tap on, because I've learned so much about this from you, is just Airbnb got two things really right, right? Their culture, and I don't know, without commenting on how true or untrue it is from what you read, in blogs and like magazines or whatever else. And I think the second thing is their brand, right? Because again, they were one of the few startups coming out of Silicon Valley that actually gave a shit about everything from their aesthetic to their interface to, just the assets that they create, right? It reminds me a lot of Apple actually to a large extent, where there's just so much detail that goes into everything that came out of, of Airbnb. And of course, tying in with brand is company culture, right? And again, you never really heard about culture from about any other startup, and even from me sitting in India, right? None of my friends in Silicon Valley have ever spoken about culture the way the ones who have worked at Airbnb. So could we double tap on that? Because again, I think that's something that I necessarily didn't take too seriously, when I started out, because you don't know the constructs of this. I never had any of this shit in my last job, right? And I remember I learned a lot about what it is to build solid culture from you, when you had sort of said put down your core values and and figure out what your like mission statement is and all of that. So could you talk about that, not just in the context of Airbnb, but just generally, what it means for an organization to think culture and brand first?
Yeah, I think it's a very top-down approach. I think uh, whoever your leadership is or your founders, I think they have to care first, because unless they imbibe that culture, like it is not actually culture, right? It's just words. And I think that's the difference between companies where culture is very evident versus where it's not. Because if it's just posters on the wall, it doesn't really mean much versus, you see it in action. So one of my first, this is my fifth startup. I worked at 4 other startups, and I think that from a culture standpoint, Airbnb is like 100x better and different than the other 3 startups I worked at before. None of them cared about culture. None of them they cared about culture, but they never cared about culture in the sense of culture was just, can we hire people um, that are, you know, that are fit to be at startup, but they want a certain type of people. They were just people who could work at startups, and that's it. And that's the culture we want to build. We want to build a culture of people walking in and getting shit done, moving fast, like execution, ship, and like, that kind of culture, right? It was never about behavior. It was never about giving a framework on how to evaluate opportunities or knowing what is right to do or wrong to do in the context of the culture of what we stand for, right? That was never talked about. And that was Airbnb was the first place where we actually talked about it. Like, Brian often says, like, we're an online platform controlling an offline experience. Anything and everything that can go wrong in the world can go wrong on our platform. So we need to have a barometer by which any person on a phone can decide whether this is right or wrong without them having to ask me, how would you answer this, right? And
Yeah.
that was his first introduction of wanting to have a culture. And they actually hired a bunch of folks and spent 6 months trying to write core values, like who are they, right? And uh, unlike a lot of other companies who, after Airbnb launched core values, a lot of other companies also started writing their own core values, but they were all derivatives of some version of either Airbnb or Facebook or Netflix. There were a few companies that had core values before us, right? Netflix had their own core values before us. Facebook had some, and they were all kind of derivative of, like, mumbo jumbo, like mixed jam. But it was never like, if you walked into Airbnb and somebody asked you, what did you feel special at Airbnb? The words you would use were the core values.
Got
Like,
it.
if you ever walked into an Airbnb office and you left, you'd be like, wow, they're such good hosts. And one of the core values was be a host. Then you'll see, like, you'll interact with anybody at Airbnb in a business capacity. You'll say, like, I don't know why they're trying to always be stingy, and why they're trying to get more from every like dime. Why would they do that? Like, they're a $1 billion company now, like they're a unicorn. But one of the core values was be a serial entrepreneur, because we're not going to spend more than we require to, because there's a bunch of other stuff to do, right? So you could see it in every single thing. Like, simplify. If you talk to anybody at Airbnb and you try to give them a very complex, like, structure of partnering, they'll be like, they'll run away, because it will just never fly inside the organization. If you can't explain to me something in 10 words, like, it's too complicated. There is no idea that we can work on in a travel industry that can be more complicated than 10 words, because every human who's a traveler and every human who's a host has to understand it, right?
Correct.
They're not solving cryptocurrency. So we have to simplify. Everything was simplification. So, and then the most amazing thing was, so we started with some core values, and 2 years later, we went through hyper growth, and we realized that out of the 6 core values, we only actually imbibe 3. We don't imbibe the other 3 anymore. So they actually went through another effort of another 3 months to revise the remaining 3 core values that we did not imbibe. And we had a new set of core values. So it was something that was very deeply thought about. It was something that founders cared a lot about. And because they cared, people felt it was important to care about it. Uh, and if they don't care, then it's like, why are they telling me to do this? Like, khud to nahi karte hain, like, what's the big deal? Right? So it has to kind of come top down.
And what's your culture at Upraised? So how have you taken that whole Airbnb experience and, manifested in your
Yeah,
own startup?
we don't really have any core values outside of being authentic and being intellectually honest. These are the 2 things we care a lot about. Being authentic, meaning we want to make sure that we don't we're not here to, like, tick off some check boxes and give them a certificate. We're here to get them a job. And if we are not going to put in an authentic effort to get them a job, like, I think we're doing everybody a disservice. So it's better to just say, like, hey, look, I don't think we can help you right up front because we just don't think you're cut out to be a PM yet, than like just, dilly dallying them around and like 10 weeks later saying, hey, pro rata, we'll charge you for 10 weeks and now take the remaining refund because you haven't kept up, and leave, right? Also, like, everything you do, you have to like do it almost selflessly, right? Because jobs, careers, they're all like very competitive roles, right? Like, I'm a founder, that's fine, but there are people on my team who will be like getting PM jobs for other people in better companies. Better is all relative, but let's say like a Facebook or a Netflix. Would you want to help that instead of just getting that job for yourself? Maybe, maybe not, right? But if you're not authentic about it, then there's many dynamics at play, right? And I think being authentic, I think, is super important. And the other is intellectually honest. Was super blessed to have a network of people that can help us solve the hardest problems, but we can only really solve the hardest problems if we are intellectually honest that we don't know how to solve this, right? If we just try to pretend like, oh yeah, we'll figure it out, we are the smartest cookies in this batch, like, बाकी के लोगों को तो पता नहीं है, we'll figure it out. And a lot of the times what ends up happening is people just kind of sit on problems for days and months, and then they're like, yeah, because they've sat on it for days and months, now they have to give some stupid excuse on why this doesn't work, right? Or this is a stupid problem to solve. So I think being that intellectually, we definitely test for intellectual honesty. We definitely test for authenticity, and we definitely test for curiosity. These are the three things we definitely test for. Beyond that, I don't think, I think it deserves more time to figure out what your core values are. But and they also have to kind of come naturally. It's not like I want to be this, so now I'll figure out how to be this. It's like, who am I, and then what is my value, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's I wouldn't say we have like deep or like many core values yet at Upraised.
I want to switch gears now
Yeah,
because I've like known you since you were in San Francisco,
that's right.
leading growth and doing like awesome things. And then, I obviously saw you sort of like move to India and lead, growth for APAC over here, and then quit your job and, have a kid. Now you like have another semi kid in the form of Upraised or adopted child or whatever you want to call it. I'm not good with children analogies.
Yeah,
Uh,
I can
uh,
tell.
but your personal journey has been so interesting because you've gone from being like a maker to a manager to an executive to a founder meets executive, and like that too with a small team, so you're technically back to being a maker. What's
Yeah.
it been like for you, and how have you, I know hindsight is 2020, but like what are the dots that you're joining now?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've been super, super lucky that, you know, in weird ways, I sort of landed uh, at places at the right time. Uh, you know, my master's landed me. I mean, I went to college. I went to a non-Ivy League school in India. I went to I went to Indiana University in the middle of no fucking where in like literally I could see cornfields on both sides. The closest airport even to get to domestic city was like 45 minutes away. There was nothing, right? And for someone like me in that geography to land their first job in Silicon Valley is like redonkulous. And I only got lucky because I was hell-bent on doing my research assistantship with a professor who was very active in Silicon Valley, and so that landed my first job. And then from there and from there on I basically realized that what works for me is just following smart people, and if I follow smart people, they go take me to better places. So that's been my mantra all along. That's basically how I've made choices. And yeah, so one thing led to the other. And then I found myself at like third startup, and I realized that what I also like to do is I like to run fast. So things that slow me down really drive me mad. And so those are some two choices I got clarity on. I was like, okay, I like to be in small teams, I like to do more, and I like to run fast. So whichever environment gives me this opportunity, I'll just kind of take on, right? Which is why when Apture got acquired by Google, and they said, for 6 months, like you have access to all teams, figure out where you want to be. I was just like, that's a mad idea. Like, who sits for 6 months? Like, that's just stupid. And at the same time, I met somebody I met the founder at Airbnb, and I was just like, oh my god, this is a crazy. I was already a user, and I was like, oh, this guy seems really smart, and like I would love to work with him. Like his just raw brain power was just like so admirable. I was just like, there's no way I would waste my time. I would definitely learn something from him. And I joined Airbnb. And in the first week that I joined, I had the worst trust and safety case. It was like the stupidest decision in hindsight. I was just like, what was I thinking? But yeah, like it kind of turned out fine because I just kind of followed this one mantra, which is like, if I follow smart people, I'll be fine. And I kept to it. And yeah, whenever I got a unique opportunity where I was like, oh shit, I have an opportunity to meet more smart people, I kind of took on, which is how I got to growth, which is how I like got to like doing Asia Pacific, which is how I like started advising a bunch of different startups. Like that's how I met you. I was like, okay, she's smart, she's going somewhere, I'll go with her. I don't care. Whatever ends up happening, that's fine. But you know, I think I'll learn something along the way, right? That's sort of generally been my instinct. And yeah, from like, you know, the most interesting sort of points in my journey actually have been times when I've moved from like maker to non-maker to maker to non-maker. Those have been my steepest learning curves. And this is almost like the third time I'm doing it now because uh, I started as an engineer in the first three startups. In the third startup at Apture, I did analytics, but then I started move into revenue and monetization. So I slightly moved from maker to non-maker. Then I went to Airbnb and I did like a quasi, like a growth role, which involved a lot of marketing. So I was like a semi-maker, not maker. Then I actually did growth engineering, which made me a maker. Then I did product, which made me a non-maker. Then I went to like completely different side with business and like worked with legal and PR and all these, you know, functions, which was like a completely different experience for me. And now that I'm back to like Upraised, it's just like I feel like my steepest learning curves have been these transitions. They're also the hardest to make, uh, but they're the most fulfilling because the kind of the pace at which you learn and the amount you learn in that duration is like so high signal. Um, you just have to kind of push yourself, and I think in those ways, I feel like the kind of people I surround myself with have always pushed me. So whether it's Mithane or, you know, my family or my friends, you know, people I work with, like, I think part of it is my drive, but part of it is also the confidence I get from people around me. Like, I've never really had a fear that like, if this fails, what happens to me? And actually having that cushion is like a mega luxury that a lot of people don't appreciate. But I am super appreciative and grateful for, like, I've never once thought that, oh shit, I left so much money on the table when I quit Google to go to Airbnb. Like, most people in their sane minds would not do it, but because I didn't, I felt like I always had this cushion. There was nothing much for me to lose, so like might as well try it. So because Google is Google, I can always come back to it. Like, but Airbnb is not going to be the same Airbnb if I join 2 years later or 3 years later, right? uh, so yeah, I don't know, I feel like in my heart I've always been a maker. In my heart I always want to be a maker. uh, it's just sort of, you know, I've kind of gone different paths to like ultimately get to being a maker. Yeah.
But when you think about you know, yourself in the shoes of a founder, right, where again
Yeah.
there's so many folks who look up to you, right, including your team, and because I've had a chance to interact with one of them, I mean, like, there's this like respect that you command, right? How for you have you been able to, you know, sort of like draw a line in between everything that a founder or an executive has to do, which is fundraise, you know, keep your investors updated, really think of, you know, what your North Star is, and also not get too compelled into being drawn into the weeds, especially again, you know, when you're a small team, because there's always that natural instinct of, you know, doing it yourself, right?
Yeah.
So how what are there things that you do to just, you know, constantly keep yourself in check and make sure that, you know, you're pulling yourself out as and when needed?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I do anything special, but I will say that one of the things that I'm much older, so I'm slightly more wiser. But I probably what has changed a few things that I have, you know, sort of taught myself over and over again is that um, every problem is not a personal problem. It's a problem that you have to solve to like get somewhere. Like it's not a problem because it's Mona solving it, it's a problem that Upraised has to solve, right? Like detaching yourself is I think very important, because otherwise egos start to come and play. And because egos are less at play, I'm fairly more open at actually discussing whatever the challenges are more openly with the team. So I don't constantly feel like I'm the only one trying to solve hard problems and they are just like executing. They're actually part of the ideation process. They're part of understanding what the problem is and how to solve it. Like I think I pretty much discussed like anything and everything, like, like I hate this lawyer to like this investor is like, being a pain to like this investor is so amazing, to like actually sharing investor decks with the team, any updates, any interesting conversations. Um, and The other thing is, I don't know if this is just luck or what, or like selection wise, but I have a lot of type A friends. And You never feel like you're an overachiever, you know? So like, it always kind of feels like, yes, you're supposed to do it, right? Like this is how, like, if you're ambitious, this is how you get to it. And there's enough role models around that have done it again and again. So you feel confident that you'll be able to do it too. Like, I think a lot of people say like, how can you have a child and how can you have a startup at the same time? And like, how did you do this or how did you do that? I don't know. I actually have a lot of friends who do this, so it's not so abnormal for me. Also, because I have so many friends who do it, I also have a support system to kind of ask for help. Right? I can go back and like, for example, some days I'm just like in the middle. I was really struggling with this whole COVID situation because I had focused 9 hours of work that I could do on a daily basis from this office space of mine. Right? Like now I'm at home and like every 10 minutes there's the mama siren that goes off. Right? And it's just like I can't get any long thought process that I have to get going to make some decisions, and I'm just kind of winging it right now. uh, the one thing I did was I was honest about it, that I was winging it. And when I asked people like, how do you do it, right, uh, I found some ways to do it, and I found some ways to find peace. And yeah, discussing that with either Mithane or like my friends or whoever, because they're all kind of type A personalities. Like, it doesn't feel like I'm a special one doing it. I feel like there are many doing it, and it's possible because they've done it and they've got like, they're much further along in that journey than I am. So I can definitely see, I definitely feel like I have more understanding of the path to getting there, which gives me more peace to do it. I don't feel nervous per se, like, or like, oh my god, how am I going to create like a company in Singapore, and like how is this thing going to work, and how is the hiring going to happen, and this and that. Like, it's just like I can just talk to 3-4 people and they can guide me doing it. So I think the support system is probably the most important. Having enough role models and people around that can like inspire you to like kind of keep pushing yourself. And then I feel like my child is happier when I'm working, so that works for everybody. I think she would lose her mind if I was obsessing about her, because I am definitely a type A personality. Like, I am a perfectionist. I want to get like everything right. And if I didn't have work to focus on, I would focus too much on her, and she would lose her pebbles. So she's probably happy that she's like, okay, all right, mama's busy. I get to eat ice cream. Uh, so yeah, it's kind of working out. I don't know. I don't really have a science to this, dude. I'm just kind of, it is true. I'm kind of winging it. But I'm honest when I don't know what I'm doing, and I can ask for help and just go along.
I'm so glad you're not a Chris Jenner, Mona.
I can't be actually. I had 6 month maternity leave. I went back at 3 months. People in my office were shocked. They're like, what's wrong with you? Why don't you just stay at home for 6 months? I was like, I don't know. I'm obsessing too much about typos. I can't. I need some intellectual vent. Like, I need to think about something other than like, basic stuff. Like, it's just, I don't know. I don't know how to chill. That's my problem.
It's a good problem to have. I'm not going to take more of your time. Last three questions for you today. The first one: a book, podcast, anything you've read that's impacted you, when you think all our listeners should read, watch, whatever.
I read this book, Powerful by Patty McNord, the lady at the head of HR at Netflix.
Patty McCord.
Yeah,
Pat McCord, sorry.
Pat or Patty? I think it was Patty.
One of these, yeah.
Yeah. Super amazing book. Um, I listen to some podcasts, but not that many. I mean, at least not. I used to when I used to commute, but now that I'm stuck at home, like I said, 10 minutes later, it's like a mama siren, so I can't really listen to any podcast. Um, any conversation that has been mind blowing, there have been thousands, and I think that actually, if there's one piece of advice is be a sucker for these amazing conversations. Like find an opportunity to connect with people and be authentic about it. Like don't just ask questions because now you have a meeting, but first have the questions and then reach out to people and like actually make that time worthwhile. I feel like especially in COVID, it just suddenly feels like everyone is accessible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Second question. One or as many as you'd like, emerging brand that's in your little black book. So any awesome Indian brand that you think everyone should check out?
I'm such a bad. This is going to be like brands. Actually, a lot of snack brands. Um, what are these quinoa chips like?
Green Snacko.
Yeah, Green Snacko. Then there was uh, the Whole Truth. I've been like munching on some protein bars from there. Uh, we recently ordered something else. I forget. Or the bunch of coffee brands, Subco and like a few more. Yeah, I don't know. I've been too busy appraising.
Thank you for no, thank you so much. This is like I would spend almost every Monday doing this, but thank you so much. You've honestly been so fantastic, and you've like seen us, I think when I met you, I was like, well, I mean, not to play the age card here, but I was like 24, 25, still fucking clueless, didn't know what I wanted to do.
So was I. I still am. I told you I'm kind of winging. I'm literally winging it. I just wake up, I take one day at a time, and I kind of figure out what I need to do for today, and that's it.
Does it work? Because I feel like that's how I am. And I am just like, I think I need to rejig my approach to life just to try it out. You know what I mean? Like, what if I like had like a checklist that said like become
It
a
doesn't work for
billionaire?
me. You know why it doesn't work for me? Because I'm a type A personality. I obsess so much about what is not done. And the longer the checklist I have, the more I just keep obsessing about it. And I just spend time doing that rather than actually just focusing on what needs to get done. And the other thing is, because of this type A personality, I'm constantly unhappy if I don't get everything done. So the more I have on my list, the more unhappy I am that, oh shit, like this doesn't get done. The day I wake up saying, okay, I know that this is COVID and I know that I have to take care of my child and I know that I only have 10 working hours and I need to like get everything in those 10 working hours, I'm much happier than thinking my day is 24 hours. Because honestly, it is not 24 hours. And if I pack myself as if it's 24 hours, I'm just always unhappy कि मैंने कुछ किया नहीं है पूरे दिन में. So like, I think it's fine to take it one day at a time.
I will take your advice on that. But thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks, Suchita.
All the best.
Thank you.
See
We
you
need it.
soon.
We need it.